continue on today with our chapter 9, which is setting the stage for our ability to predict, make predictions on what certain things happening around the world or certain things our government is pursuing, how that will impact the economy. And so yesterday we started off with 2 of the 4 markets. And so this is a version of the circular flow diagram that's different than the one I've been using. The one I'm put up on the screen with the flows of the economy is something I developed before, but all the same type of stuff is in here. So we've got, geez, I need to put these things back on to see this little print here. All right. So we've got households over here, businesses over here. So if you see something like this, the reason why I wanted to point this out in your homework or tests, we've got our consumption, beer, pizza, and chicken wings in the final goods and services market. And that is spending on that for businesses. Businesses are going to the resource market to buy land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. That creates income, national income, for the households. Households are paying some taxes to the government, and the government's participating in both of those markets. And so we've got the loanable funds market we touched on yesterday, people putting their savings into funds and then businesses borrowing those funds. And then finally, the rest of the world is sitting up here, the foreign exchange market. And so in order to do our exports and imports, the American dollar is not money in China, right? So when we think about paying for stuff with money, the American dollar is not money in China, the yuan is. And so in Argentina, it was the Argentine peso. In Guatemala, it's the quetzal. And so we have to exchange money before we actually exchange the goods, right? To sell the goods. So that's the foreign exchange market, also known as the Forex market. All right, so any questions for that little overview? So that's what we kind of started touching on yesterday. And so I gave you the resource market and the loanable funds market real briefly yesterday. And so then we'll have the foreign exchange market, where there's going to be a supply and demand. Now this time we're going to be measuring like yen, the Japanese yen, and how many dollars per yen does an American have to give up to get yen to buy a Toyota, right? So this is the foreign exchange market, or Forex. So the Forex market is the market for currency. Market for currency exchange. From that then, there'll be an equilibrium price of yen, the exchange rate. And so maybe it ends up taking a penny, 1 cent, to buy 1 yen. And then this is the amount of foreign exchange, the quantity that's being traded. And then we'll kind of explore increase in changes with the exchange rate. All right, and then the last one's the granddaddy of them all. This is the most important one, as far as the one we'll use the most for class. And with this one, we're going to be measuring real GDP. When I use the word real, what does that mean? Counts for inflation, and so you can really think of the actual quantity of beer, quantity of chicken wings, quantity of lawyer services, quantity of education hours, right? So real GDP is capturing the quantity of goods. And then over here, we're going to be measuring the price level, the average price level. That's our inflation connection. And so this is where we're going to start off today, is kind of building this one. So we've got basically quantity and price from microeconomics, but it's a little different because this is the dollar value of all final goods and services, and this is the average price of everything, right? So it's definitely aggregated up and adding up, looking at the sum. All right, so let's start with supply. So long run, actually let's start off with short run. Let's see, what does your book do? Actually, they kind of just write it out. Oh no, they do. Okay, short run aggregate supply. So this stands for short run aggregate supply. And so what is the supply in the United States look like? And we're going to have a supply curve similar to the supply of beer, pizza, or chicken wings. So an upward sloping curve. But here it's a little bit different than what we had with the supply of beer, in that we're going to be holding some prices constant and other prices not. So output prices are going to be allowed to go up, but resource prices will not. And so the short run supply curve shows a positive relation between real GDP and the price level, because resource prices are assumed to be fixed. So an important resource is the wage, and so wages are held fixed. So imagine wages are at $20. So the story goes back to really the same we did in chapter 3, is that businesses are willing to put more on the shelves, they're willing to supply more, as long as resource prices are held constant and they can get higher prices for their goods, right? So it's the same concept going on, but for different reasons. And so let's dive a little bit deeper into those reasons. So imagine businesses in general. When Walmart, and so I'm kind of back to reality here, we're trying to tell this part of the story to motivate this. So when the economy is doing good and prices are going up, that's good for Walmart, right? Their profitability is going up. Does everybody automatically get a raise in 1 month? No, right? Now, after 3 to 6 months to 8 months to 9 months to 10 months, will there be maybe a little bit of a raise coming now? Yeah, so we have this thing where resource price changes are lagging behind output price changes. The same is true in reverse. If the economy falls into a recession and it's heading down, Walmart starts to realize, wow, we've got a lot of excess inventory. What do businesses do when they have excess inventory? Sales, right? They run the sale, drop the price, try to move the product. When they drop the price, do they cut their employee wages? No, right? So there's kind of this lag time. Now, if Walmart, if we truly are in a recession and not just some sort of little blip on the radar, and Walmart's just not doing good, right? So prices are continuing to be kind of depressed and they're not moving product. Do they have to lay off a worker or two? Yeah, they didn't do it right away, but they might have to lay off a worker or two, maybe some wage freezes. In some cases, some companies might do wage cuts, and they might say, well, we're gonna do a temporary wage cut. Here at OU, when Ottawa University wasn't doing so hot, I don't know, 8 years ago or so, they cut my matching program. So my pay stayed the same, but when I started here, I had a dollar for dollar match. I put in $1, they put in $1, up to 5% of my pay, they took that away, right? So they didn't do that right away, but if you know, we're not quite hitting the numbers budget-wise for whatever reason, we might eventually have to impact the price of resources. So the point of that whole thing is that there's kind of some plausibility and logic to resource prices not adjusting quite the same as output prices, and usually those would be behind, changing behind. So we're going to put that here as a key point. Resource price changes, let's put parentheses, like wages, will tend to lag behind output price changes. Resource price changes, like wages, will tend to lag behind output price changes. So, for example, let's just put maybe 6 to 9 months. Okay, and so that's why we have this upward sloping short run aggregate supply curve where resource prices would be held fixed. All right, so any questions or comments there? This is kind of the big insight. This is like double key, so kind of super asterisk that one. That's going to be an important part of how things are explained later as we get into even future weeks. Okay, so then what about the long run aggregate supply? Long run aggregate supply. So this shows the potential output, the full employment level of real GDP. And for that, and I want to double check because sometimes I use a P and this book uses an F. So that is YF. The F here is for full. So we call it the full employment level. So what we're imagining now is to say, well, if everything was going great in the United States and everything's kind of in equilibrium, that what is the potential for the economy? And so we did this with the production possibilities frontier as well, the PPC in this class, right? The production possibilities curve, the maximum combination of goods the economy can make. And so as I look at this graph here, I want you to kind of think somewhere along here, what's biggie number one? Biggie number one. Good, increasing real GDP. So economic growth. Now we're thinking kind of long run economic growth. Long run economic growth is somewhere along here. So I'm going to pull the golf club up here. So as we move through time, if the economy is growing, GDP is growing. And we're utilizing our resources in the most efficient way. And so somewhere along here is kind of the ideal amount for a given amount of resources and technology. The economy's potential is somewhere along that horizontal axis. And that potential is not related to prices at all. So it is a perfectly vertical line, meaning it's independent of prices. So it shows the potential level of potential output of the economy, which is independent of the price level. So key point for this one is that its location is dependent upon the quantity of resources and technology. So the full employment level of the economy is determined by the quantity of resources and technology at a given point in time, or some sort of time frame. All right, so this then sets up our long run and short run aggregate supply curve. Any questions on that one?
I had a question on the last one.
Okay, sure.
It says that price raises and whatnot, like wage raises, will come like months afterwards. But what if they just don't?
Well, we'll kind of get into that, but eventually, depending on where they're at, they're either going to go up or down to adjust for purchasing power. So let me pause that one, that it will, they might have been out of equilibrium to begin with, and that's why they're not adjusting, or something else will adjust. So let me kind of circle back to that one as we go. All right, our last one then is the demand. So the aggregate demand curve, the AD curve, we're going to have all three lines crossing here. All right, so let's see. So aggregate demand, AD, shows the demand for C, I, G, and X, our cigarettes. Shows the demand for various purchases of final goods and services, which was our cigarettes. Shows the demand for various spending categories at various price levels. So let's kind of pose a question. Why is it downward sloping? Okay, so the first one is a purchasing power effect. The purchasing power effect is that at lower prices, we can buy more stuff. Lower price level means that a given level of income, and now I'm going to start to transition you a little bit more here into income using that Y. So for the cigarettes, GDP, remember income and spending are actually the same thing. So in the macroeconomy, so we're starting to say, we can say real GDP, or real GDP is also the income of the nation. The income of the nation, the spending of the nation, same thing, right? So if the price level is lower, then a given level of income means that a given level of income will command more purchases of goods and services. So let's see, let's call this number one. Number one, purchasing power effect. Any questions on that one? Make sense? So we've been talking about purchasing power of our money, so prices are cheaper, we can buy more stuff. Number two is an interest rate effect. So interest rate, little I effect. A decrease in the price level leads to a decrease in the real interest rate that we did yesterday with the Fisher formula. So a decrease in the price level leads to some lower real rates of interest, which leads to more borrowing for investment and consumption. And we might as well throw the government in there too. And we could even throw the rest of the globe in there, but we'll leave it at domestic stuff. So from yesterday again and our previous week, investment is businesses buying machines, equipment, and buildings, right? Stuff that helps make other stuff. From our cigarettes here. So investment by businesses, consumption by households. They're gonna go run out and buy a new car, buy a house, used house anyway, buy some stuff, maybe a big flat screen. I heard the TVs, maybe you guys know this, but I was just talking with a couple buddies last night and they said somebody had an 86-inch TV, 86, and that is a monster.
It's a cinema.
It's what?
A cinema.
A cinema, yeah, definitely indoor. All right, and then of course this is our government who loves borrowing money. That's why our national debt's going up so much. Okay, so when the price level's low, there's some impact here on interest rates. All right, number three is the international effect. A decrease in US, I'm going to put US on here since we're talking international. if things are cheap in the United States, does the rest of the world want to buy more American goods or less? If American goods are cheap, do they want to buy more or less? More, right? So a decrease in the American price level, if there's downward pressure on prices, that leads to an increase in our exports. I'll write it out. And a decrease in our imports. So this is also U.S. exports, U.S. imports. Because now all of a sudden Americans are also thinking, wow, geez, things are cheap here in the United States. I don't need to buy goods from Germany, goods from China, goods from other places. So both of these two effects lead to a decrease in net exports. So remember, this is net exports from our cigarettes. This X is exports minus imports.
A decrease?
Yes. Let's see. Exports minus imports. Yes, sorry, increase. Thank you, Jesse. That's probably worth an extra credit for Jesse. I don't want you guys to have the wrong thing on there.
To be honest, I thought you were just gonna be like, oh, you thought it was this, but it's actually this.
Nope. I usually write this out and then I probably would have caught my own thing. So an increase in exports, let's just add that on. So exports equal, net exports equals exports minus imports. And so we got this one going up, this one going down, which means the overall effect is going up. Okay, so those are the things driving, or part of the things driving aggregate demand. Any questions there?
Does that say net exports and imports?
This part here?
Yes.
Net exports, which then I define here. So net exports is what the big X is. Okay, get rid of this. Okay, so we'll end up kind of shifting these curves around next week. We'll kind of play with the model a little bit. So here we're just kind of setting things up with this chapter 9. And so we want to think about the different types of policies and what might impact things. So two types of government policy that are going to impact the economy. Number one is fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is changes in G and or changes in T. So G is our government spending, buying more weapons of mass destruction. So changes in G is changing spending levels. So spending policy of the government in the United States, this is Congress and Jumpin' Joe Biden currently. So the Congress and President are the ones responsible for what we call fiscal policy. So Joe wants to send troops over to Israel. Where's that money coming from, right? That is the president making that call without Congress. Congress making some changes to Tax policy, without, and it's possible that that can happen without presidential approval, and so they're making those changes. So these are changes to either government spending, taxes, tax rates, other things related to that, all falls under the umbrella of fiscal policy. Okay, any questions on that? So when we look at T here, big T is kind of the tax collections, but I want you to put another formula in here. Big T equals little t times Y. This is our income tax. So big T is tax collected from income. The way I have it written here. There's other ways taxes can come too. Little t is the tax rate. And big Y here is, as always, your income. So, Congress and the President and whoever's in office can look to change the tax rate. We're going to raise corporate income tax rates. We're going to raise tax the rich, raise tax rates on the rich, or whatever the case is. Those are all fiscal policies, the main thing we're trying to bring home with this chapter. All right, any questions there? All right, so there's a big distinction between fiscal policy then and monetary policy, especially in the United States. But monetary policy is changes in the money supply. Changes in the money supply. So changes in the money supply lead to, I'm going to put an arrow here, changes in interest rates. And then we kind of saw how interest rates would be influential on, should I buy a car, should I buy a house, should I expand my business? All of that's going to fall under monetary policy. So monetary policy is changes to the supply of money to influence borrowing, lending, and interest rates. And then we're going to spend a whole chapter on that one when we get later, but we need to kind of lay that one down here. Main point again is that's monetary policy, and in the United States, that is done by the Federal Reserve Bank. So it's controlled by the central bank of the United States. Or I should say, maybe I'll just put this as a second little bullet. Central bank is kind of the general word we use. So in the US, it is the Federal Reserve, affectionately known as the Fed. The other feature that is common among developed countries, but not less developed countries, is that there's an independence between monetary policy and fiscal policy. So Joe Biden cannot influence monetary policy directly. So he can't tell Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, hey, let's bump up the money supply a little bit. Let's get things going, right? Let's kind of loosen up credit, make things a little easier. That's not under the control of Congress or President. So we keep these functions separate in most developed countries. And again, that's a concept we'll circle back to later. So key point, in developed countries, like the USA, these policies are independent of each other. It gets a little messy after that, but in theory, they're independent of each other. And so let's just kind of be frank on what I mean by that. President and Congress can't directly do monetary policy. Probably not. But unlike human beings, we don't die. So it's not quite as big of a deal, but we don't want it to get, in my opinion, bigger than where we're at, but we probably will too. But those will be some of the fun things we'll talk about. Jesse's question was, do you think we'll ever get out of debt? Like get the national debt to zero, and I'd say probably not. And it's not too big a deal for reasons we'll get into later. Okay, so we got to get our wheels going here. So now, imagine this where all three lines cross. What do you think we call that? Equilibrium. Good. So the economy is at rest here at some price level. I'm going to, a lot of times, arbitrarily say that that's at a price level of 100, which was our base year, just to kind of keep the numbers easy. But it kind of is what it is, right? And then we have our potential. So currently where the economy's operating at, we have this equilibrium where we're at the full employment level of GDP. And so we're at the natural rate as well. So this is our long run equilibrium. So long run equilibrium. Let's put all three cross each other. All three cross. And most importantly, the actual level of GDP is equal to the full employment level of GDP. And a little insight here, a little kind of note, maybe we'll put it as a key point here, is that if we're operating at the full employment, woo, that's a little puberty there. If we're operating at the full employment level of real GDP, then we're at the natural rate of unemployment. So there's a connection here that at full employment, equilibrium, economy is at the natural rate of unemployment. I'll write it out here. Natural rate of unemployment, which was technically chapter 8. That we learned about the natural rate of unemployment, where there's only structural and frictional unemployment. Okay, so let's look a little bit more at the loanable funds market. So, where do I want to do that here? I think I will get rid of this. I don't know if I'll get rid of this yet. I might play with that one. Okay, so loanable funds market. What we want to think about is how that is global and how that can impact interest rates and what the inflation premium. So let's look at the inflation premium and loanable funds. All right, so imagine here we've got a 6% real rate of interest. This is loanable funds, and this is the interest rate. So you guys we just did one picture before of that. And let's just assume for starters that this interest rate is here because there's 0% inflation. So our inflation expectation is 0 with this demand. This is how much money we want to borrow with inflation rates being 0. And savers, the supply of loanable funds, they too are expecting 0% inflation. So we want to look at the impact of inflation as it relates to interest rates. And so we had the, let me get rid of this. So recall the Fisher formula. And the Fisher formula was the relationship between the real rate of interest, the nominal rate of interest, and the inflation rate. So if there's now 3% inflation expected, not 0, due to some monetary policy. So the Fed is doing something to increase inflation. What would need to happen for interest rates? So if we had, and again, this is the real rate of return, so investors are expecting 6%. But now we learn that prices at Walmart are going to be 3% higher in the future. When they contract with each other, what does the lender need to do now if previously they were happy with 6%, but now there's going to be 3% inflation in a year? What needs to happen to the interest rate that they're negotiating with the borrower? It needs to go up. Nick, how much? You're on the right track. There's going to be 3% inflation. Here, they previously negotiated when there was 0.
So it's going up from 6 or going up from 3?
Yeah, going up from 6. So by 3 to 9. right? So when we have the inflation rate higher than 0, you can think of the demand for funds needing to shift up, and I'm going to kind of cheat here a little bit, and the supply to shift up, because both of them want to take inflation into account. And so with 3% inflation, we can put little percent signs on here if we want, then it would be higher. And so the point in showing this now is that this is the nominal rate of interest is now 9%. So the real rate is still down here at 6, but we've taken into account that inflation. And so from this example, if we want a 6% here, and inflation, if inflation is 0, then this would be 6. But if inflation is expected to now be 3, we need this to be a 9. All right, so this is just kind of connecting the dots here with the real interest rate and the money interest rate. And I need to introduce the money part. So note, nominal, quote unquote, is the same thing as money. So little I told you, and the book tells you too, they go back and forth. I'm just trying to give you guys a clarification here. I called this the nominal interest rate, but it is also referred to as the money rate of interest. So same thing as the money rate of interest, or the money interest rate. So either or, be able to go back and forth with that. Okay, and so the last little point here is this expected inflation rate is referred to as the inflation premium. Inflation premium. We're charging 9. I really only want to get 6. Well, why are you charging 9? Well, it's due to inflation, right? It's the premium, the amount above the real rate to reflect the expected level of inflation. Alrighty, so one more thing to tackle here, the foreign exchange market. I kept that up there, maybe I should have just switched it, but I think we will. Whoops, I take that away. Okay, any questions before we close out the loanable funds market? All right, so the foreign exchange market, this is the one I left here. The exchange rate is the level of exchange between one currency and the other. So, so let's put Forex market. A market that shows exchange rates for currency. So for example, when we went to Guatemala last week, we had 7.3 Q equaled 1 American dollar. So in Guatemala, the quetzal is affectionately known as the Q. How much Q is that going to be? And so you have to do some math in your head when you run to the stores and like, oh, this is 21Q. Well, 21Q is approximately $3, right? So you kind of have to keep that straight. And so for the exchange rate, as we're showing it, we can think of it two ways. So note, two ways to think about the exchange rate. So we can think about this as 7.3 Q per dollar. It's kind of the way I have it reflected here, but I'm using it a little bit different here with this math. Or we can think of it as 1 over 7.3, 1 over 7.3 dollars per Q. Somebody got a calculator handy? Or one of your computers? I'd like to get the decimal of what 1 divided by 7.3 is. No phones, just a regular good old fashioned. Justin's got his calculator out. 0.136. So we'll just do it to 14 cents. 0.14 dollars per Q, right? Okay, the reason I wanted to lay this out a little carefully is that the way this textbook does it, we're going to put the foreign currency on the horizontal axis, which means we're going to measure the exchange rate in terms of dollars per amount of foreign currency. So we're going to be using this as our exchange rate. So for our class here, this is E. But you can go back and forth, and you usually do. Okay, so if there's an increase in E from 0.14 to 0.16 dollars per Q, is that appreciation or depreciation when this number's going up? Appreciation or depreciation, Tim? Depreciation of what? Of the dollar. Okay, so here's the thing that's a little bit tricky. If one is appreciating, what's happened to the other currency? It's depreciating. So yeah, we can kind of rely on our foreigner. He probably deals with this a lot more with the euro versus the dollar, right? So if this number is going up like I have it framed here, we want to think about, well, what actually went up? So an increase in E is appreciation of whatever you're measuring on the horizontal axis. Of, quote unquote, whatever is measured on the horizontal axis. Is one way to, when you're looking at it graphically, which you guys will do for the homework and test, so that's why I want to kind of give you this is a little bit of the Russ econ hack here. This is an econ hack. If this number's going up, it's appreciation, which kind of naturally means we're doing this, of whatever's here. So in this case, this implies here that this is an increase in E is appreciation of the quetzal. And then I'll put in parentheses, it's depreciation of the dollar. Of the American dollar. So in your homework or test, this is where I'm trying to give you this insight so you don't get messed up. They might give you a problem like this and they say, has the dollar appreciated or depreciated? And so this went up, but that's appreciation of the quetzal. The dollar actually depreciated. So you kind of have to be able to go back and forth, right, of which one. And that's why if you hang your hat on, if this goes up, then we've got some appreciation of the yen. So back to your graph here. Let's go ahead and add a second demand curve and a second supply curve where some changes have gone on, causing appreciation of the yen from E1 to E2. And let's just say this is now 2 cents. Now this isn't too bad to reason out in your head too, right? So I used to be able to buy 1 Q for 14 cents, but now it costs me 16 cents. Is that bad or good for me as an American? It's more expensive. It's bad. American dollar's depreciated. So you can kind of reason this out too if you kind of put on your American hat. But in order to put on your American hat, you got to do this little kind of fancy notation here of it's 0.16 of a dollar, 16 cents per Q. Once you get that down, you guys should nail this, and it makes it a lot easier if you nail those fundamentals down. Okay, so then of course depreciation. So let's say this is if. So if there's an a decrease in E, then the foreign currency has depreciated. And then put in parentheses, there's been dollar appreciation. Okay, so a couple other things then to tidy up to bring us back to why is the exchange rate going up or down. And it also ultimately comes back to purchases and investment of the foreign goods. So kind of the key point, what causes E to change? Question mark. And one answer is the demand and supply for goods and services, which is, in this context, exports and imports. I feel like I got too many acronyms in here, so I'm going to put demand and supply. Demand and supply for actual things, goods and services. The other thing that it does is the demand and supply for or of investments. in financial assets. Financial assets and real assets. So real assets would be something like real estate. Seems like this is percolating up on foreigners buying American properties. So Chinese nationals own real estate in the United States, quite a bit of it. Financial assets would be more like dollar denominated stocks and bonds. All right, so these are called capital flows, as opposed to exports and imports, which would be physical final goods and services flowing. All right, so a capital outflow are purchases of real and financial assets from foreigners. Capital inflow is sales of real and financial assets to foreigners. Okay, so where is this concept coming from for the United States? So this is kind of the key points for the United States. What is X for the USA? So X was net exports equals exports minus imports. What do we do more of as Americans? Import. So for the United States, imports are bigger than exports. So we have a trade deficit for the USA. What does that mean? It means exports are less than imports. That number is a negative number. Okay, so the key point with that is if we have sold less than what we bought, we purchased a whole bunch of plastic stuff from China and they didn't buy enough Ford, GM, and Chryslers. How do we balance that? We owe them money, don't we? If we kind of think of we being the whole United States.
You mean like the government?
Don't we? Well, no, I mean the whole nation in a sense. So the whole, as far as kind of treating us all as one, if we kind of think of, I bought more from you than what you bought from me, I owe you, don't I? The Americans kind of owe them some money if they purchased more. The trade wasn't equal, right? The trade wasn't equal. We gave them $100 worth of automobiles. They gave us $300 worth of plastic toys. We still owe them $200. It wasn't an even trade. Does that make sense? And so we owe them money. So that's the first part I wanted to put on here. So the trade deficit means, this means the USA owes some money to, let's just say the rest of the world, my affectionate name for all the foreigners. Well, what really happens then is that they pick up some real and financial assets. So an IOU would be like a loan, right? So if we made them an IOU, that would be a financial asset like a bond, but they can also buy some of our real estate and other things. So we end up having this capital inflow makes up the difference. So the key point for the United States is that the capital inflow makes up the amount the USA owes. That's what we mean by the capital inflow. Okay, so then the last graph for today, let's go ahead and measure our, maybe we'll do the Q down here since we had Guatemala. So we're going to measure the supply and demand for each country. So the supply of Q is determined by our exports to Guatemala and our capital inflow. In general, you can think of this being the sales to row. So this is kind of the sales to the rest of the world. But we're selling now financial assets and we're selling Ford, GM, and Chrysler. So exports plus the capital inflow makes up the reasons why we're supplying more Q. And down here, the demand is our imports. So the imports of goods plus capital outflow and this is the U.S. purchases from the rest of the world. So it's mango season. It's mango season down in Guatemala. And so if there's an increase in demand by Americans to buy Guatemalan mangoes, what's your prediction of what will happen to the exchange rate? So there's an increase in demand. Nick, you seem to be on this. What were you saying? For the dollar or for the Q? For the dollar, very good. So Nick's on this. So check it out. If we want to buy more mangoes from Guatemala, there's an increase in demand, which is going to drive up the E, which is an appreciation of the Q, which is a depreciation of the dollar. And that's the foreign exchange market for starters. All right, that wraps us up for today. Have a good Easter weekend and a good Friday. So no class tomorrow, chapters 8 and 9.